BBC News with Julie Candler. An Egyptian journalist working for the Qatar-based Al Jazeera television network has been released. Mahmoud Hussein was held in Egypt for more than 4 years without being formally charged. He was accused of having spread false news. In a major reform to its state-controlled economy, the Cuban government is to allow small private businesses to operate in most fields. The measure will expand permitted private activities from a list of 127 to more than 2,000. Myanmar has seen its largest demonstrations since Monday's military coup. Workers from western Myanmar joined locals in the city of Yangon to demand the junta step down and Aung San Suu Kyi be released. There have been protests across Chad against President Idris Déby's nomination to run for a 6th term. Mr. Déby has held power for more than 30 years. Sudan says any unilateral step to fill Ethiopia's dam on the Blue Nile this year would threaten its national security. Sudan's Water Minister Yasser Abbas told the Reuters news agency that the US, the EU, the UN and the African Union should mediate in the dispute between Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia. Chile's Interior Minister has promised justice after protests erupted over the killing by a policeman of a street performer. Police have arrested the officer involved in the shooting on Friday in the town of Bonchipuli. Italy's 2 largest political parties have indicated they could be open to joining a government headed by Mario Draghi, a former president of the European Central Bank. Mr. Draghi has completed a first round of talks with all parties as he tries to form coalition. Farming groups in parts of northwestern Spain are calling on the local government to control populations of wolves. The animals killed at least 59 sheep on Thursday in the province of Zamora. BBC News.
A sloppy and snowy Super Bowl Sunday in the tri-state. Heavy burst of snow dropped more than half a foot of snow, even causing a tree to topple. And this could just be the start of a wintry week. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Gilma Avalos. The Super Bowl Sunday snowstorm moving out tonight, but we are on the cusp of a bitterly cold week ahead. From New Jersey to New York and Connecticut, today's storm hit all corners of the tri-state. Quick burst of snow made driving tricky. The bright spot here, that heavy, wet snow is easy for the kids to play in. And as far as the snow's lingering impact, most school districts will be open tomorrow, and the numerous vaccine hubs closed by the storm are expected to reopen too. Appointments are being rescheduled, but we are not in the clear. We could see several rounds of snow this week as temperatures fall into the single digits. So let's go right to Storm Team 4's Matt Brickman tracking the next blast of snow and the cold. Matt.
Yeah, today's snow wasn't a huge amount in the city, Gilma, only 4.5 inches in Central Park. We did have spots throughout the 5 boroughs, 6 to 7 inches of snow. But this just adds on to what's already been an active season, already 32.5 inches of snow in Central Park. That's more snow this winter than we had for the last 2 winters combined. And there's plenty of folks ahead of us. Several places got 9 inches or more. Westwood, New Jersey and Bergen County up to 9.1. Melville out on Long Island, 9 inches there. Fairfield, Connecticut had 9 inches of snow. And Stony Point, Rockland County, 8 inches fell today. Here's that next round. Tomorrow's a day off. Back to snow on Tuesday. Low pressure dragging across the country. This one will be less, I believe, than what we saw today. Looks like some pretty light snow, maybe over 3 inches north and west. But I've got 1 to 3 from the city through New Jersey, northern New Jersey, and then up into Hudson Valley, and then a pretty sharp cutoff on the south end of that. This is the first and likely the weaker of 2 snow chances we are watching for this week. We'll talk about the second one and all that cold air Gilma was telling you about as well. Telling good news in the forecast coming your way in just a few minutes.
All right, Matt, thank you. And this storm moved through quickly, but it left behind a mess in parts of Manhattan. A huge tree fell over and blocked 9th Avenue in Hell's Kitchen. The storm suspended some outdoor dining today as well, but the city just announced that it will resume tomorrow. News 4's Adam Harding is live in Hell's Kitchen, where people are shoveling snow for the second time in just 2 weeks. Adam.
I know, Gilma, it just seems like we're in a never-ending cycle of all this snow. Normally, 9th Ave behind us here would be busy, but this is the scene that it looks like today. This tree came crashing down hours ago. It is still here on 9th Ave, and it's not clear when it will be removed.
Tonight, the aftermath of the storm. A massive tree blocking traffic on 9th Ave in Hell's Kitchen.
I walk by this every day, so it's kind of a shocker.
Henry Lee lives in the neighborhood.
It's actually crazy. I couldn't believe it. I'm trying to figure out if the snow pulled it over or was it the wind.
Take a close look at this surveillance video first obtained by News 4. It's a busy afternoon when out of nowhere, the tree comes crashing down with pedestrians and bikers nearby.
And you think this snow is absolutely what brought it down?
I think the weight, even if you look at that one, it's actually leaning a little bit. So I think all this slush is actually puts a lot of weight on them.
We are lucky there is no restaurant with outdoor dining right there. That would have been a catastrophe.
Even with cleanup underway, the city shut down outdoor dining on roadways, but restaurants could stay open on sidewalks. Another blow for businesses looking to cash in on Super Bowl Sunday. The mayor, meantime, applauding sanitation crews for clearing streets quickly. City schools are planning to open Monday. Still, the storm forcing some vaccine sites to close, like this church in Harlem. Vaccination appointments now rescheduled. The second storm this week had many out in Bryant Park enjoying this winter wonderland.
Armageddon 2. It's a total panic. Everyone's losing their minds.
Well, not exactly, but it is a headache for some. Thankfully, the totals this time around are in inches, not feet.
You sick of this snow yet?
It's winter. It's part of winter, so.
I'm sick more of the pandemic. I grew up in Buffalo, so snow is snow.
Well, Gilma, I got to tell you, as the cleanup here continues, some neighbors are concerned about the tree right next to the one that came crashing down because of that heavy snow that Matt was telling you about, those big flakes. The snow was wet. We should also tell you, we learned tonight from the city that outdoor dining, those restaurants where they go out onto the streets, that can resume tomorrow. But I do want to caution everyone, if you walk outside, the roadways, the sidewalks, because it's cold, things are freezing over and things are slippery. Live tonight in Hell's Kitchen, I'm Adam Harding, News 4 New York.
Thank you. And New York City extended its ban on alternate side parking to next Friday to help street crews clean up today's snow. Tonight, Long Island digging out after it got slammed with 5 to 8 inches of snow on top of last week's nor'easter. This is video of the Nautical Mile in Freeport, where roads are slippery even with crews pre-treating and plowing streets. Vanessa County Executive Laura Curran says her road crews have things under control. She also doesn't want you to worry if you had a COVID vaccine appointment scheduled for today.
Scheduling those for Tuesday evening, so people will be reached out to and contacted via email to make those new appointments.
And meantime, this year's Polar Plunge in Long Beach was canceled because of the pandemic. But News 4 found some people who still took the plunge into the icy waters today. Very brave people. They did it, of course, to raise money for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Roads were tough to navigate even after crews pre-treated and plowed them. In Suffolk County, an oil tanker flipped over on Sunrise Highway in Eastport today. The driver was hurt but is expected to recover. Connecticut got a fresh coating. This was the scene earlier today in downtown Waterbury. Many areas in Fairfield County received nearly 8 inches of snow. Many parts of Westchester saw up to 8 inches of snow as well. About 7 inches fell around Rye, but the snow did not stop joggers from running around Rye Playland and the frozen waterfront, a winter wonderland for pups playing off-leash there. The snow piled up outside homes in New City. Rockland County saw a bit less snow, around 3 to 5 inches, in fact, and COVID vaccine appointments scheduled with the county for today will be moved to tomorrow. And as Matt warned, we could see more rounds of snow this week, so now is the perfect time to take the Tri-State's most accurate forecast with you by downloading the NBC4 New York app.
BBC News. A further day of protest against last week's military coup in Myanmar saw tens of thousands of Burmese marching through the largest city, Yangon. As protesters dispersed, residents banged pots and pans as a show of resistance. Saudi Arabia is said to have commuted the death sentence of a Shia activist to 10 years jail. Ali al-Nimr was detained in 2012 after having taken part in anti-government protests. Italy is allowing a rescue vessel to dock in Sicily despite several of more than 400 migrants aboard having tested positive for coronavirus. 8 people with coronavirus were isolated. George Shultz, President Reagan's long-serving Secretary of State, has died. He was 100 years old. Mr. Shultz spent most of the 1980s trying to improve U.S. relations with the Soviet Union and forging a course for peace in the Middle East. President Biden says there is no reason for the United States to be drawn into direct conflict with China. He said both sides would engage in what he called extreme competition instead. The president also said Washington would not lift sanctions on Iran in order to revive negotiations with Tehran over how to restore the nuclear deal, which the US withdrew from under Donald Trump. Officials in the new US administration have made it clear that Iran must resume full compliance with the 2015 deal before the US will rejoin the agreement. The US infectious diseases official Anthony Fauci has suggested second doses of coronavirus vaccines should not be delayed. Dr. Fauci said the science was not clear on the issue. The president of Haiti, Jovenel Moïse, says police have arrested more than 20 people he accused of plotting to kill him. Mr. Moïse did not provide any further details or evidence, but his justice minister said the authorities had foiled a coup. The detained include a Supreme Court judge. BBC News.
This is AP News. I'm Rita Foley. Did you see the game last night?
Awesome! I've been a Bucs fan since I was in 5th grade. I love the Bucs. I was crying earlier, man.
The Buccaneers beat the Chiefs 31-9 in the Super Bowl.
Tom Brady threw 3 first-half touchdown passes, including 2 to Rob Gronkowski, as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defeated the Kansas City Chiefs 31-9 in Super Bowl 55. Brady says the Super Bowl victory capped a season where he and his teammates had to overcome so much both on and off the field.
Guys just did what we were asked, and we tried to just show up with a great attitude to work however it was. We were pretty fortunate on our team. Guys were really disciplined with all the protocols in place, and we ended up getting the job done.
The 43-year-old threw for 201 yards en route to his 5th Most Valuable Player award, while Tampa Bay's defense sacked Kansas City's Patrick Mahomes 3 times and intercepted him twice. Steve Carney, Tampa.
There were only 25,000 fans at the game because of the pandemic. Chicago teachers and some students could start returning to school on Thursday. The city has a preliminary agreement now with the teachers union on COVID-19 safety protocols, though the teachers union still has to vote on whether to approve it. We've learned that House Democrats working on a COVID-19 relief bill plan to propose boosting the child tax credit to as much as $3,600 per child. Former President Trump's impeachment trial begins Tuesday. The AP's Julie Pace.
I think it's very unlikely that you would have enough Republicans who would vote to convict, but I think it's possible that there are some wild card Republicans. I mean, we certainly are watching Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate. He has signaled that he's open to conviction, and that would be really extraordinary.
The AP's Julie Pace. The National Weather Service is warning those dangerous wind chill temperatures will continue in the nation's midsection, especially the upper Midwest. This is AP News. What do you think of the job the Postal Service is doing? The AP's Shelley Adler reports.
Weary postal workers recovering from the holiday surge are hoping the new president will bring a new tone. President Joe Biden does not have the power to hire or fire the U.S. Postmaster General, but he can reshape the Postal Service Board of Governors through appointments. And that's something American Postal Workers Union President Mark Diamondstein would like to see.
The people of the country are not getting the service that they are promised and deserve under the law. The law says prompt, efficient, and reliable service. It needs to be fixed. It needs to be fixed quickly. And the new president can certainly play a role in that.
The Postal Service Board of Governors will meet Tuesday for the first time since the president's election. I'm Shelley Adler.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says full employment could return by next year if Congress approves President Biden's relief plan. I'm Rita Foley, AP News.
Hot flashes, irritability, intimate dryness, even unsatisfying sex. Hi, I'm Dr.
This is Asian View from NHK World Japan. I'm Hiroko Kitadai. Here's a quick look at what's been making news here in Japan and elsewhere in Asia. In the northern Indian state of Uttarakhand, military and police personnel have joined a rescue mission after a broken glacier triggered flash floods. At least 10 people are dead and more than 100 are missing. The piece of the Himalayan glacier fell into a river on Sunday, sending an avalanche of water and mud down a narrow ravine. Local authorities say at least 16 people have been rescued, but the number of deaths may rise. Prime Minister Narendra Modi tweeted that he is monitoring the situation and that the nation prays for everyone's safety. In Myanmar, protests denouncing last week's coup are growing despite the military's clampdown on information. Tens of thousands of people took to the streets of Yangon on Sunday to demand the release of the country's de facto leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Many wore red, the color symbolizing Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy party. Police under the command of the military took some activists and demonstrators into custody. Protesters in Myawaddy, a town bordering Thailand, say police fired warning shots into the air when approached by demonstrators. The Japanese Prime Minister says he will continue to negotiate with Russia to settle the territorial issue of 4 Russian-held islands claimed by Japan. Suga Yoshihide sent the video message Sunday to an annual national rally to demand the return of the islands.
It's regrettable the issue has not been settled, and a peace treaty with Russia has not been concluded, 75 years after World War II ended.
Suga also said he and Russian President Vladimir Putin agreed last September to continue dialogue on issues, including the signing of a peace treaty. This is NHK World Japan. People in China paid tribute on Sunday to a doctor known as the Wuhan whistleblower 1 year after his death. Li Wenliang was a 34-year-old ophthalmologist who tried to sound the alarm in the early stages of the coronavirus outbreak. In December 2019, Li posted a warning to an online chat group about multiple cases of pneumonia in Wuhan. Authorities responded by accusing Li of spreading false information. Li later contracted the virus and died. People left flowers and written messages near the hospital.
He was the first person to alert people about the virus.
I will never forget this hero of our city, Wuhan.
Meanwhile, experts from the World Health Organization are wrapping up their investigation in Wuhan of the pandemic's origins. They visited a seafood market where the virus was initially detected. They also interviewed officials at an institute of virology known for its research into coronaviruses carried by bats. But they say their understanding of the virus could take some time. The Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics Organizing Committee issued a statement on its website on Sunday about gender equality. It follows international criticism over its president Mori Yoshiro's remarks about female board members. The message says that the vision of the Tokyo Games is respecting, celebrating, and embracing a variety of individuals and diversity. Mori said last week that board meetings with women take too long because they talk too much. The statement included an apology from Mori saying, "I deeply regret my comments and would like to sincerely apologize to anyone whom I have offended." The Central Committee of North Korea's ruling party will hold a plenary session this month to finalize plans for the year's strategic tasks. South Korea's Yonhap news agency says defense and the economy could be at the top of the agenda, as was the case with the party convention last month. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un called the United States his country's biggest enemy at the convention. He also vowed to advance Pyongyang's nuclear and missile programs. South Korean newspapers say one of the focal points is whether the North will present any policy in relation to the administration of U.S. President Joe Biden. Apple growers in the northern Japanese prefecture of Aomori are exporting something a little different to Vietnam in time for the Lunar New Year holidays. Vietnamese customarily give fruit as a gift during the Tet holiday. And 6 years ago, some started to include apples grown in bags from Aomori. But fruit shops in the capital Hanoi started selling non-bagged apples, saying they are sweeter. The apple exporter J.A. Zenno Aomori plans to carefully study how consumers respond to the fruit with an eye on expanding sales in the fast-growing Vietnamese market. This is Asian View from NHK World Japan. I'm Hiroko Kitadai.
Updates from Reuters journalists. Here are today's top stories.
The protests against Myanmar's coup continue for a second day.
This is Reuters Now.
American workers making $60,000 a year should receive a stimulus check as part of the latest coronavirus aid package. That's according to U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, who said the White House seeks to provide targeted payments for those who need it most. The White House has said it is open to negotiation on who should be eligible to receive the proposed $1,400 checks, but has declined to specify where it thinks the income cutoff should be. Yellen's interview on CBS's Face the Nation provided some clarity. If Congress approves the $1.9 trillion plan, the country would get back to full employment next year, Yellen said. Otherwise, unemployment would linger for years. Republicans on Capitol Hill have resisted the administration's COVID-19 relief plan, concerned it would unnecessarily increase the national debt following the $4 trillion in aid Congress passed last year. U.S. President Joe Biden has said he would like to win bipartisan support for his plan, but that Republicans were falling short of the mark in terms of what needs to be done. Under normal rules, 60 votes would be needed for such a bill to clear the Senate. But last week, Congress approved a budget plan that would allow a coronavirus relief measure to pass the Senate with a simple majority. With the Senate split 50-50, Vice President Kamala Harris could cast a tie-breaking vote for Democrats if Biden decides to go it alone.
Tens of thousands rallied across Myanmar for a second day on Sunday to denounce last week's coup and demand the release of elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi. The protests are the biggest the country has seen in over a decade. Crowds filled the streets of Myanmar's biggest city, Yangon, sporting red shirts, flags and balloons, the colour of Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy party. Many gestured with a three-finger salute, which has become a symbol of protest against the coup.
We have a right to show our disagreement that we're against the dictatorships to prevent inequality, oppressions in accordance with the democracy. We need to get rid of the fear. I take part in this revolution as I believe that the military dictatorship will fail if we bravely join forces.
There was no comment from the junta in the capital, Naypyidaw, some 220 miles north of Yangon. In the southeastern town of Myawaddy, shots were heard as armed police tried to break up a large crowd. It was not immediately clear if there had been any casualties. On Sunday afternoon, the junta ended a day-long blockade of the internet that had further inflamed anger. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Myanmar has said more than 160 people have been arrested since Monday's coup. The military takeover has halted the Southeast Asian nation's troubled transition to democracy and drawn international outrage.
South Korea's Hyundai said Monday it was not in talks with Apple about developing self-driving cars. The potential tie-up was first reported in local media last month, with Hyundai confirming the talks were at a preliminary stage. Its affiliate Kia was also reportedly involved in the discussions to develop electric cars and new battery technology by 2027. The initial report sent shares in both automakers soaring, but they tumbled on Monday after it was confirmed the talks had been paused. In separate regulatory filings, Hyundai and Kia both said, quote, "We are not having talks with Apple on developing autonomous vehicles." Apple typically insists on strict secrecy from its potential partners. The iPhone maker has never acknowledged it was in talks with Hyundai about building vehicles. In December, Reuters reported that Apple was moving ahead with self-driving car technology and aimed to produce a model of its own as early as 2024.
You're up to date. Check back later as stories develop.
NBC News Radio, I'm Mark Mayfield. Buccaneers quarterback Tom Brady is the most valuable player of Super Bowl 55. Matt Mattinson has more.
The 43-year-old threw 3 touchdown passes, including 2 to former Patriots teammate Rob Gronkowski in a 31-9 win over the Chiefs in Tampa. It's the 7th career championship for Brady and his 5th career Super Bowl MVP honor, both records. Brady said after the game he's definitely coming back next season. I'm Matt Mattinson.
President Biden and the First Lady are honoring healthcare workers fighting the coronavirus pandemic. In a pre-Super Bowl message, the president told everyone to mask up and stay socially distanced. First Lady Jill Biden sent a message to frontline workers, saying we couldn't have made it without them. And former President Donald Trump's second impeachment trial starts tomorrow, and a majority of Americans think he should be convicted. An ABC News Ipsos poll out Sunday shows 56% of Americans think the former president should be convicted. Mark Mayfield, NBC News Radio.
The clothes website Boohoo has bought the Dorothy Perkins, Burton and Wallace brands for just over £25 million. But the online retailer won't be taking on the 2,500 staff nor the 214 shops. Here's our business correspondent, Emma Simpson.
These were the last remaining brands from Sir Philip Green's Arcadia retail empire to be sold. The group collapsed at the end of last year as the pandemic brought all its long-running problems to a head. Last week, ASOS bought Topshop, Topman and Miss Selfridge. Now another online fashion giant has snapped up the three other household names. Boohoo says the acquisition will help broaden its customer base and is promising investment to make the brands fit for the current retail market.
Ministers say the public can have confidence in coronavirus vaccines despite concerns about the Oxford-AstraZeneca's effectiveness against the variant first identified in South Africa. Preliminary research from there suggests the jab offers limited protection against mild and moderate forms of the disease. Professor Shabir Mandi from the University of Witwatersrand led the trial. He said that a similarly designed vaccine fared better, which was a hopeful sign.
The Johnson & Johnson vaccine with a single dose reduced severe disease by 89%. Now, these two vaccines use similar sort of technology. They're very similar in terms of their immunogenicity. So I think extrapolating from that, there's still some hope that the AstraZeneca vaccine might well perform as well as the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in a different age group demographic that are at risk of severe disease.
The Health Minister, Edward Argar, said Professor Maddy's findings supported those of the vaccine team at Oxford University about the jab's efficacy in severe cases.
That's really important, not just, obviously, for the benefits it brings to those individuals, but it also is a significant factor in the health service's ability to manage the demand for beds and treatments and the number of patients it's looking after.
At least 14 people have died in northern India after a piece of a Himalayan glacier fell into a river and triggered a huge flood. Officials say as many as 200 people are still unaccounted for in the state of Uttarakhand. The Culture Secretary, Oliver Dowden, has called the racist abuse directed towards footballers online absolutely shocking and said that it must stop. He said the government was going to change the law to make social media companies more accountable for what happens on their sites. MPs have criticised the slow pace of progress being made by a government scheme to tackle climate change and keep homes warm in winter. The Environmental Audit Committee warns that at the current rate, it would take more than 10 years for the Green Homes Grant to meet a target of improving energy efficiency in 600,000 buildings. The government says it's working to improve the initiative.
Call 1-888-FARMERS to switch, and you could save an average of...
Farmers Truck or Fire Insurance Exchanges are affiliate. Products not available in every state.
Amazon. No, where do I park? No, where...
USA Radio News with Dan Naraki.
As the economy continues to struggle from the effects of the pandemic, the employment landscape is coming under more scrutiny. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says she's concerned by the current state of employment. She tells CBS's Face the Nation that after Friday's job report, the job market has a big hole to dig out of.
Just 6,000 private sector jobs created, 49,000 overall, and that's after a month in which we actually saw a job loss. So, yeah, we have 10 million people unemployed, 4 million have dropped out of the labor market, and another 2 million are working part-time who really would like full-time work. So we're in a deep hole with respect to the job market and a long way to dig out.
This is USA Radio News. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration will reportedly issue new guidelines to their agents revising how they handle arrests and is expected to reduce the number of deportations. The new guidelines coming after the White House's initial order to put a 100-day pause on deportations was blocked by a federal judge. Representative Henry Cuellar says he's reached out to the White House to express his concerns with the new immigration policies. The Texas Democrat tells Fox News that he's seen concerning changes in the patterns of border crossings.
Even before the election, I said, hey, we got to be careful as to how we deal with the borders, because what I'm seeing now at the borders, we're seeing groups coming in. Mm-hmm. You might not see the caravans, but you're seeing large groups of 50 to 60. In fact, in my area, we had about 263 individuals the last week in 2 large groups. So the thing is, what do you do with those individuals? And then what do we do about deportation? And we have to find balance what ICE has to do. I support ICE. I support the men and women that are there. We just got to find that right policy.
This is USA Radio News. President Biden has indicated that he wants action on his $1.9 trillion COVID relief package sooner than later. Congressional Democrats took the first step towards getting the package approved without Republican agreement, starting the budget reconciliation process on Friday. Taking that route would only require a majority to pass in the Senate, where Republicans would otherwise be able to block the legislation. Senator Bill Cassidy says it's moves like that make him believe the Biden administration doesn't care about working across the aisle. The Louisiana Republican tells NBC's Meet the Press that the GOP has tried to negotiate for a bipartisan solution.
I am absolutely willing to work with anyone if it's good for the American people, because that's what we should all be about. We have conservative solutions. The more conservative values infuse public policy, I think the better public policy is. On the other hand, the administration is showing very clearly they don't care if they have to work with us. They're willing to push things through, even if someone like Larry Summers, a former Democratic Treasury Secretary, says it's boneheaded policy. I'm paraphrasing. And even if we come in good faith with at least 10 and more that would have joined us, and they say they don't care. So you've got that. It takes two to tango. Right now, I'm not sure we have the two to tango.
And former NBA MVP Derrick Rose is on the move after reportedly being traded to the New York Knicks. ESPN reporting that Rose will leave the Detroit Pistons in exchange for guard Dennis Smith Jr. and a 2021 second-round draft pick. For USA Radio News, I'm Dan Naraki.
Call 1-888-FARMERS to switch.
Prime Minister has pleaded not guilty to charges of bribery, fraud and breach of trust. Benjamin Netanyahu says he's the victim of what he calls an attempted coup. Harry Fawcett is outside the court in occupied East Jerusalem.
The Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, for the first time answering in court to the charges, essentially pleading not guilty. What he actually says was that he confirmed the written submission by his lawyers in his name, and he then sat through about 20 minutes or so of the legal argument before, quite extraordinarily, just getting up, saying thank you to the court and leaving as the trial carried on.
Police in Myanmar have used water cannon to try to break up protests. Thousands have returned to the streets for a third day of demonstrations. Last Monday, the army took over the government and arrested the country's civilian leader, Aung San Suu Kyi. South Africa has suspended plans to vaccinate frontline health workers with the AstraZeneca jab. That's after a trial showed it might be less effective against the more contagious variant that's caused the country's recent surge of COVID-19. Rescue operations have resumed in northern India to find around 200 people still missing after a Himalayan glacier collapsed. At least 11 bodies have been recovered. The glacier sent water rushing down a valley. Somalia's opposition leaders say they no longer recognize the president. Mahmoud Abdullahi Farmaajo's term has expired, but with no agreement on elections to replace him. An alliance of opposition candidates says it won't accept an extension of his term. The Chinese government says it's aiming to vaccinate 50 million people as the Lunar New Year travel rush begins, but analysts warn that's too few. Health experts say as many as 500 million will have to receive the jab to reach so-called herd immunity. And US President Joe Biden says he will not lift sanctions to get Iran back to the negotiating table on its nuclear program. In a TV interview, Biden suggested the move would only happen if Tehran stops enriching uranium. Former President Donald Trump withdrew from the 2015 nuclear deal that led to Iran rolling back its commitments.
Another historic week in American politics.
Former President Trump's second impeachment trial begins tomorrow. It's also the first impeachment of a U.S. president no longer in office. Can House Democrats make a case for it?
I'm Sasha Pfeiffer with Rachel Martin, and this is Up First from NPR News. South Africa hits the pause button on AstraZeneca's coronavirus vaccine. Researchers found it was less effective at protecting against the new strain circulating there.
These results are very much a reality check.
What is the country doing to adapt to the changing virus?
And how does the news coming out of South Africa affect the U.S.? The South Africa variant is in at least 2 states. Other variants have also been detected here. If they continue to spread, will our current vaccines be able to keep up? Stay with us. We've got the news you need to start your day.
Support for NPR and the following message come from Yogi Tea. Check self-care off your to-do list.
It's happening again. Another Senate trial to impeach Donald Trump, but this time he's not president anymore.
Which makes it historic on several counts. It's been nearly a month since the House voted to impeach him. Democratic impeachment managers allege Trump is responsible for inciting the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. Republicans and Trump's lawyers argue that the impeachment itself is unconstitutional, and we expect to hear more from them today.
NPR senior political editor and correspondent Domenico Montanaro is with us this morning. Hi, Domenico.
Hey there, Rachel.
So, House impeachment managers, all of them Democrats, filed this 80-page brief last week. What's their case?
Well, they argue Trump is, quote, singularly responsible for a mob of his supporters storming the Capitol. They say not just because of his rhetoric at that rally outside the White House, but because of his 2 months of false claims about the election that embedded this false sense of grievance among people who were there at those riots that the election was stolen from the former president. The House impeachment managers this week are expected to make an emotional case, going to be driven by video. They want to bring the events of January 6th back to Congress to remind senators of what it was like, and most importantly, why the mob was there. You can expect to see and hear Trump supporters there that day saying they were there for Trump and that their feeling was that they were sent by him. The impeachment managers have also been studying their last impeachment trial of Trump just a year ago. And remember, this is a different team of prosecutors led by Jamie Raskin, congressman from Maryland. He's said to be focusing on trying to make the case clearly, succinctly, and without antagonizing Republicans.
Today, we're expecting a detailed brief from Trump's lawyers, but a filing last week gave us a glimpse into their defense. What did we learn?
You know, they say that if Democrats want to use video, be careful what you wish for, because they might use video of protests over the summer over racial equality and some statements from Democrats. You know, that's something of a false equivalence and some whataboutism, but something they're prepared to do.
Right, I don't really get how that plays into this.
Well, that's, they're going to take some statements from, potentially, they're threatening to take some statements that they felt were antagonizing those rallies, but it has nothing to do, obviously, with what happened on January 6th. So the senators are going to have to judge that on the merits. But mostly, they're going to be making this constitutional argument that the Senate lacks jurisdiction in trying a former president for impeachment. They're going to focus on the language in the Constitution that spells out the two penalties for an impeachment conviction, that someone convicted through impeachment could be removed from office and potentially disqualified from holding future office. Now, that is not the view held by most constitutional scholars. And even a prominent Republican lawyer this weekend wrote in the Wall Street Journal, Charles J. Cooper's got ties to Senate Republicans and House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, that this actually cuts against the Trump lawyers' interpretation, and it only sets a mandatory minimum and urges Republicans to judge Trump on the merits.
A conviction is going to require at least 17 Republican senators to join all the Democrats. That seems unlikely.
It does, because already 45 Republicans have voted to say that they think that this is unconstitutional, so that's what they're going to rest on.
NPR's Domenico Montanaro. Thanks, Domenico. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And we should note we're going to have live coverage of the Senate trial on NPR once it starts tomorrow. All right, to South Africa now, where the government has stopped rolling out the coronavirus vaccine by AstraZeneca. The country's health minister made the announcement Sunday.
We have to hold on to AstraZeneca. It is temporary until we figure out these issues. What are the next steps supposed to be? When we know those steps, then of course we bring it back.
The pause comes after a study found the vaccine may not be as effective against a COVID-19 variant that was first detected in South Africa. The country has 1 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine and had planned to deploy them very soon. This setback is a blow to South Africa's pandemic response. So far, the country has recorded more than 1.4 million cases and at least 46,000 deaths.
We've got NPR Global Health correspondent Narit Eisenman with us this morning. Good morning, Narit.
Good morning, Rachel.
All right, so ever since these major variants emerged in the UK, in Brazil, and South Africa, there has been this worry that vaccines might not work against them. Is that what we're seeing now in South Africa?
We really don't know yet, but here's why officials there are alarmed. Starting late November, early December, South Africa saw this massive second wave of coronavirus infections. fueled by the variant first detected there. It's distinct from the variants first found in UK and Brazil. It's now the dominant strain in South Africa, and it's popping up in many other countries as well, including the US. This variant appears to be more transmissible, and it's got some mutations that suggest that existing vaccines could be less effective against it. So, South African scientists who were doing a long-running trial of the AstraZeneca vaccine there decided to check how is it performing against the variant. Sunday night, the lead researcher, Shabir Mahdi, announced in a televised national briefing that the results of this preliminary analysis were troubling. In the trial they conducted with about 2,000 South Africans, the AstraZeneca vaccine was only about 10% effective at preventing mild or moderate cases of COVID-19 from this new strain.
Wow, 10% is not good. There are, though, I understand, some caveats around this study, right?
Yeah, really big caveats. The sample size was tiny, less than 40 COVID cases from the new variant. Also, this finding is just speaking to the vaccine's ability to prevent mild cases. At the briefing, Mahdi, the lead scientist, noted that what really matters is whether a vaccine can prevent serious cases, the ones that overwhelm hospitals, cause people to die. And this trial does not shed light on severe cases because only people who were young and quite healthy were studied. Mahdi noted that trials of other vaccines indicate that they are often far more effective at preventing severe cases than mild ones. So he's actually optimistic that the AstraZeneca vaccine will prove useful against severe disease. Company officials have also said they think that's the case, and they're also already working to adapt the vaccine against this particular variant. And South Africa's health minister, Zweli Mkhize, said they may still end up deciding to use the AstraZeneca vaccine, but say for certain lower risk populations like young people.
So what about some of the other major vaccines, do we know if they will work against this variant?
This is a hot question because, of course, this is not an issue just for South Africa. This variant could become common all over the world. Now, it does appear that another vaccine that's key to many countries' strategy, the Johnson & Johnson one, is at least more effective at preventing mild disease and severe disease from the strain prevalent in South Africa. But bottom line, it's going to be a vital area of research moving forward.
Right. NPR's Narit Eisenman. Thank you, Narit.
Glad to do it.
So what does the situation in South Africa mean for us here in the U.S.? There is concern here about these more contagious variants of the virus.
We know the South Africa strain has already popped up here, and now a new CDC study says a variant first detected in the UK could become the dominant strain in the U.S. by March. There is good news, though. As the pace of vaccinations accelerates, the number of new infections per day is declining. So far, more than 41 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines have been administered across the U.S.
NPR's health correspondent Allison Aubrey is here. Good morning, Allison.
Good morning, Rachel.
All right, so scientists have been concerned about how effective the vaccines are going to be against these variants. What is the response to this South Africa news?
Well, the AstraZeneca vaccine is not authorized in the U.S., so it's not being used here. But if the South African strain were to spread here, and it has been identified in at least 2 states, this could influence the effectiveness of all of the vaccines, including Pfizer and Moderna, the ones being used here now. Now, the vaccine manufacturers are on this. They do have the ability to kind of retool the vaccine. Here's former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb. He spoke about this on CBS yesterday.
I do think that the existing vaccines are going to offer reasonable protection against these new variants. And we also may be able to develop in a timely fashion, maybe in 4 or 6 months, a consensus strain that bakes in a lot of the different variation that we're seeing to have boosters available for the fall. So I think that there is a reasonable chance that we're going to be able to stay ahead of this virus as it mutates.
So there's some optimism there.
Yeah, but getting as much vaccine into the population was already urgent. I have to imagine trying to stay ahead of these emerging strains. I mean, it obviously adds another layer of urgency to the vaccine rollout.
That's right. And the pace of vaccinations is picking up. I mean, more vaccination sites are up and running. About 32 million people have received at least 1 dose so far. Now, Rachel, there had been talk of changing the strategy to give the shot to more people faster by holding off on the second dose. That would stretch out supplies. But over the weekend, Dr. Anthony Fauci really, threw cold water on this idea. He says there is just not enough data to support this strategy.
From a theoretical standpoint, it would be nice to know if you just give 1 dose, how long the durability lasts and what is the level of effect. But what we have right now and what we must go with is the scientific data that we've accumulated, and it's really very solid.
which is for 2 doses spaced 3 to 4 weeks apart.
2 doses, that means we need more supply, right? What do we know about vaccine supply at this point? Is there enough to maintain or even increase the pace of vaccinations?
Yeah, well, so far 60 million doses have been delivered, and vaccine makers are expected to produce millions more, obviously, and they say they can and will. There are many channels of distribution, everything from mega sites at stadiums, hospitals. This week, about 1 million doses will go out to more than 6,000 retail pharmacies. I spoke to Allison Hess at Geisinger Health. They're a provider based in Pennsylvania. They're administering more than 2,000 shots a day at their 4 sites.
We have a lot of people that are vaccine shopping. So they're putting their name on a couple different lists, and that means that they're no-showing at locations where they had appointments. So it requires a lot of shuffling and kind of an end-of-day scramble to make sure that we're not wasting any doses.
And there are also instances where people make appointments at a site that has temporarily run out of their supply for a week. So there are snags, but overall, Rachel, I'd say the picture is improving.
And we will hold on to that good news wherever we get it. NPR's health correspondent, Allison Aubrey. Thanks as always, Allison. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Rachel.
And that is Up First for this Monday, February 8th. I'm Rachel Martin.
And I'm Sasha Pfeiffer. Start your day here with us tomorrow. And since the news doesn't stop when this podcast ends, follow us on Twitter at Up First.
Thanks so much for listening to Up First. You can find more in-depth coverage of the stories that we talked about today and so much more on NPR's Morning Edition. It's a radio show. Steve Inskeep hosts it. Noel King hosts it with me. You can find Morning Edition and your NPR station at stations.npr.org.
From the New York Times, I'm Michael Barbaro. This is The Daily. Today. In recent days, the Republican Party has taken 2 votes on what to do about 2 of its members, Liz Cheney and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who have taken 2 very different positions on the party's path forward. My colleague, Alex Burns, on what the outcome of those votes may tell us about the identity crisis playing out inside the GOP. It's Monday, February 8th. Alex, I want to read you a sentence. You ready?
Okay.
Quote, "A divided Republican Party has erupted into open and bitter warfare." Do you remember who wrote that sentence?
I have a feeling that it might be me. Is it me?
It's you and it's me. We wrote it together. It was...
Was this Mitt Romney in 2016?
This is the day that John McCain and Mitt Romney, the 2 past Republican nominees, denounced Donald Trump as he was about to become the Republican nominee.
I remember it well. That was a sort of stunning day, and I think that lead has held up reasonably well.
Right, and I revisit that lead now because the concept of a civil war within the Republican Party is not at all new. It starts 4 years ago when we wrote those sentences, when it becomes clear that Donald Trump will be the nominee. And you have this dynamic of the establishment Republicans horrified by Trump on one side, the diehard Trump supporters on the other, and those in the middle unwilling or uninterested in speaking up in either direction. And while that dynamic has more or less held over the past 4 years, the president's supporters have more or less cowed everyone into silence. And so the Civil War has gone into a kind of hibernation, and many in the party seem to hope that a kind of truce might emerge once the president left office, and they would just kind of find their way forward as a party. But it seems like that's been threatened in recent days. Does that feel right?
It does. I think that changes on January 6th in an important way. I think it becomes clear on and after the attack on the Capitol that anybody in the party who was under the impression that President Trump was going to ride off into the sunset and they were going to just go back to being the Republican Party as it existed before, really had another thing coming, and that there was going to need to be a much more head-on confrontation with the question of the Republican Party's identity. Mm-hmm. And that has really come to a head, at least in an initial skirmish over just the last few days in this struggle within the House Republican Conference over the fates of Congresswoman Liz Cheney from Wyoming and Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia.
So introduce me to these two lawmakers who are now at the center of this post-Trump Republican fallout battle. And let's start with Cheney.
Well, look, I think that what we've watched over the course of the last several weeks certainly tells us how fragile our system is.
Well, Liz Cheney is a relatively new arrival in the House. She is in her third term as we speak, but certainly not a new figure in Washington or in Republican politics. She's the daughter of the former Vice President Dick Cheney. She was a State Department official in the Bush administration. She ran briefly for Senate in her native state of Wyoming a couple cycles ago, and then ultimately comes to the House after the 2016 election, rapidly rises to leadership to the role of House Conference Chair, which makes her the most prominent woman in the Republican Party in the House.
Okay, so given all that, what exactly does she come to represent in this post-January 6th battle over the Republican Party's future?
Well, she becomes, in the immediate aftermath of January 6th, the most prominent and stern voice of censure against the president in the House.
Wyoming's only member of the House of Representatives, Liz Cheney, issued a written statement today saying, in part, this insurrection caused injury, death, and destruction in the most sacred space in our republic.
She votes for impeachment, but she doesn't just vote for impeachment.
None of this would have happened without the president. The president could have immediately and forcefully intervened to stop the violence. He did not. There has never been a greater betrayal by a president of the United States of his office and his oath to the Constitution. I will vote to impeach the president.
That is a staggering statement in terms of its moral force and in terms of the challenge that it represents to other Republicans who clearly are not prepared to go as far as she is, either in criticizing Trump verbally or in actually voting to impeach him or censure him in any way.
Mm-hmm. And so what is the reaction from fellow Republicans to this vote of conscience from Liz Cheney?
Well, a lot of them don't see it as a vote of conscience. A lot of them see it as a betrayal. And there are the Republican colleagues who see it as a betrayal on principle, that, we're the party of Trump and you are betraying our president. And then there are Republicans who see it as maybe not a betrayal in a moral sense, but certainly lack of political consideration, that there are people who don't even necessarily disagree on the substance of what she said, but who would have preferred to kind of keep their heads down and wait for President Trump to leave office and just try to let a whole unpleasant experience blow over, who then feel that a member of their own leadership has blindsided them by throwing down the gauntlet. So there's a whole lot of discomfort and resentment directed at Cheney, including by fellow members of Republican leadership who feel like she has put them on the spot in a way that they didn't want to be put on the spot.
I love Wyoming!
One of her colleagues, Matt Gaetz, the very, very pro-Trump, very, very Fox News-friendly congressman from North Florida, actually goes to Wyoming to try to headline a rally against Cheney, calling for her defeat on her home turf.
I'll confess to you, this is my first time in Wyoming. I've been here for about an hour, and I feel like I already know the place a lot better than your misguided representative, Liz Cheney.
That's the kind of thing that you rarely see in Republican politics at all, let alone directed at a member of leadership.
Right. That is the stuff of a civil war.
Now in Washington, D.C., the private insider club of Joe Biden, Mitch McConnell, Mitt Romney, Nancy Pelosi, and Liz Cheney.
It is the stuff of a civil war. And it's also the stuff, by the way, that based on our reporting, former President Trump is delighted to see, that we know that he has talked to his associates about enjoying the pain that Liz Cheney seemed to be suffering back home.
It's going to be a long 2 years, but let's go get them.
And what you saw in the last few weeks was a real drive from the hard right flank of the Republican conference to strip Liz Cheney of her leadership job, to make sure that even if she was going to continue to serve in the House, even if she would continue to be a member of the party, that she would not have that title of conference chair, which does confer a level of authority and stature that your average House member does not have.
Okay, so that's Cheney. What about Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene?
So I want to tell you guys, the fake news media, the DC swamp, the political establishment tried to take me out, but there's definitely more of us than there is of them.
So Greene is a figure who comes from a very, very red district in northern Georgia. It's an open seat in the 2020 election. It's a crowded primary. And as this is happening, all kinds of stuff from her past and, frankly, really her present starts to come out in terms of her flirtation with QAnon, conspiracy theories, offensive comments that she has made about a range of groups and political figures. So we knew that Marjorie Taylor Greene was an extreme figure last year when she was a candidate for the House. But in the aftermath of the election and the aftermath of January 6th, we see new proof of that over and over again. We see video of her harassing one of the Parkland students, David Hogg, who then becomes a gun control activist. We get new detail on just how outlandish some of her conspiracy theories have been. Anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about the Rothschild family using a laser weapon to start fires in California, suggesting that perhaps a plane did not hit the Pentagon on 9/11. This is just as far out as it gets for somebody who actually holds federal office. And it is a very vivid illustration of the kind of extreme figure who has come into the political arena on the strength of President Trump's movement, but who is actually more extreme than Trump himself.
So how do these two House Republicans, who could not be further apart in background and belief, end up on such a clear collision course?
As the Republican Party is debating whether to punish Cheney, whether to eject her from leadership, there's a parallel debate happening both within the Republican Party but also within the Congress as a whole, involving the Democrats who do control the majority in the House of Representatives, about what to do about somebody as extreme as Marjorie Taylor Greene, somebody who Democrats, I think, unanimously see as complicit in the violence of January 6th, and whether somebody like her can be tolerated in the chamber at all, let alone sitting on specific committees like the Education Committee. And we see that debate about what to do about Greene and her place in the House culminate almost literally at the same time as the Republican Party's debate about Cheney in a meeting within the Republican conference this last week.
And that sort of inevitably turns these two figures into kind of test cases for the various future identities of the Republican Party.
You could see this as a moment where the party is really at a crossroads and where Republican leaders and where rank and file Republicans have to decide, are you going to be the party of Liz Cheney? Are you going to be the party of Marjorie Taylor Greene? Or are they going to somehow try to be a party that encompasses both of them, that includes both a lawmaker who was one of the most prominent voices encouraging the Stop the Steal conspiracy theories that culminated on January 6th, and someone like Cheney, who becomes the loudest and most important voice in the party saying this was an atrocity.
We'll be right back.
This podcast is supported by America's leading beverage companies, working together to reduce plastic waste in our environment. Not all plastic is the same. America's beverage companies are carefully designing 100 that completes the circle and reduces plastic waste. Please help get every bottle back. Learn more at everybottleback.org.
This is Sue Craig, investigative reporter for the New York Times. People keep secrets. We all do. But it gets tricky when it's a person with significant power, and the secret is big, say a conflict of interest, government corruption, or covering up abuse. When it comes to violations of the public trust, unethical or illegal activity, and people's lives are affected, we believe you deserve to know. But people with a lot of power also have the means to make sure their secrets stay hidden. So you need organizations like the New York Times to say, let's investigate this. Let's put resources behind uncovering the truth. And that's what I do. It's a 24/7 commitment, and it means that sometimes I can't publish until I've spent months or even years following every lead and checking every fact. All those resources, they're available to us because of New York Times subscribers. If you'd like to support this kind of work, you can subscribe at nytimes.com/subscribe.
So, Alex, what ends up happening at this meeting of Republicans where Cheney and Green's fate will be decided?
Well, this meeting on Wednesday night is the moment of truth for Liz Cheney, that if she is going to be removed from her leadership job, or if she is going to get a vote of confidence from her colleagues to stay in that role, it's going to happen on Wednesday. Mm-hmm. And what you have is a combination of, Liz Cheney making a plea in her own defense, and then this kind of open air therapy session among her colleagues who speak for and against her. And one of the big questions going into the evening is, will she express any kind of remorse for perhaps not the impeachment vote, but, will she acknowledge that she could have communicated better about her intentions? Or will she essentially just throw a bone to other members who feel miffed for one reason or another, but could be persuaded to vote to keep her in leadership? And the answer essentially is no, that what she does is kind of draw a line in the sand and say, this was a vote of conscience for me. This was a position that I took as a matter of principle, and we ought to be a party that lets people do that. And then very significantly, the last person to speak before a vote is taken is Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader. And in the weeks before this meeting, McCarthy has been kind of all over the map in terms of how he personally is talking about President Trump's role in the events of January 6th, sometimes seeming to entirely let him off the hook, sometimes saying that the president bore some responsibility. He has certainly not tried to match Liz Cheney's moral indignation. And when he gets up to speak, he gives a strong endorsement of keeping her in leadership and saying Liz is not going to be on the same page as me on everything, but that she's a valued member of our conference and that I am your leader. You asked me to lead, and this is what I am asking of you.
And what happens?
They take a secret ballot, and the results are actually not all that close, that Cheney keeps her post by a margin of 145 to 61, so more than 2-1 in her favor. And for her, it's a real vindication. And for McCarthy, it's a vindication. And for the folks who stuck their necks out on impeachment, it is a sign that at least behind closed doors, and at least when it's a secret ballot, and it cannot be turned into a litmus test on social media and on Fox News, folks are willing to stick with somebody like her.
Okay, what about Green? What happens to her in this same meeting?
So a lot of members go into the evening hoping that they hear from Green a total repudiation of the things that she has said in the past and an apology. And that's not quite what happens, that there are some conflicting reports of exactly how far Green went in the meeting to distance herself from things she has said in the past. That seems clear that there were members who were in the meeting who heard what they wanted to hear. An acknowledgement from her that, some of these views are pretty far out and they do not fully represent who she is. But other members, people who are, somewhat more like a Liz Cheney figure, hear no apology from Green, or at least not the kind of apology they're looking for, not the kind of full-throated repudiation of her past comments and behavior that they were hoping for. And that at one point, Green says to the Republican conference, if they're coming after me now, they will come after you next. That, Democrats and the media will not be satisfied just by marginalizing someone like me, that it doesn't end there. It's a version of the sort of cancel culture, slippery slope argument that you hear an awful lot from the right these days, but it's being used in defense of somebody who is, without a doubt, one of the most extreme figures in American politics.
And so what do her colleagues ultimately do by the end of this meeting?
It's not exactly the same situation as Cheney in that there's not a vote in this meeting. Are we keeping Marjorie Taylor Greene or are we ejecting Marjorie Taylor Greene? It is clear even before the meeting that the Republican leadership is probably not going to strip her of her committee assignments. But in the aftermath of the meeting, it seems clear enough that Greene gave enough ground to enough of her colleagues that the Republican leadership is not going to feel overwhelming internal pressure to sanction her in a highly public way.
So at the end of this meeting, Alex, and in this grand battle between these two avatars of the Republican Party, it's kind of a confusing result, right? I mean, the party does not choose to be one or the other. Like you said earlier, it seems like, in fact, they want to be both.
That's right. They're treated as two separate issues that can be dealt with separately and can be dealt with actually with leniency on both sides, that Liz Cheney wins this vote of confidence. It's a big one for her. It's a big setback for the Matt Gaetzes of the world who wanted to make a very public example of Liz Cheney. But on the other hand, there's no vote on Marjorie Taylor Greene, at least not Wednesday night. Instead, there's a vote the next day.
Liberty and justice for all.
The chair will entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle.
It's a very public vote. And it's a vote, by the way, that includes Democrats. It's a vote of the whole House because even before Republicans meet on Wednesday night, Democrats have made it abundantly clear that whether or not the House GOP is going to tolerate this person, they are not going to tolerate her. And Democrats do have the majority in the House. So on Thursday, Democrats bring up a vote of the whole House to strip Greene of her committee assignments.
Right, and I watched some of this floor debate, and it was very dramatic.
It really is.
I cannot sit idly by and allow white supremacy and hatred to have decision-making power over our students' futures.
And there's a lot of passion and emotion and indignation.
We cannot build an equitable anti-racist education system if a seated House Education and Labor Committee member incites violence through the perpetuation of racist lies in an attempt to overturn an election.
Particularly on the Democratic side, where they see her as having made common cause with the mob, with the violent mob that attacked the Capitol.
Mr. Speaker, this is a sad day and a difficult day for the House of Representatives and for our country.
You see Steny Hoyer, the Democratic majority leader.
Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues
hold up an image.
To look at this image
that Greene used in her own campaign that showed her holding an assault rifle, and it's a photoshopped image of her holding an assault rifle next to the faces of left-wing members of the Democratic caucus.
And she captioned it, the squad's worst nightmare.
People like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Let us not do nothing. Mr. Speaker, let us do the right thing. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida.
This culminates in a call of the roll where everybody in the House needs to take a position for or against. Does she keep her committees or does she not?
On this vote, the yeas are 230 and the nays are 199. The resolution is adopted.
In the end, 11 Republicans vote with all of the Democrats to strip Greene of her committees.
So by and large, it ends up being the Democrats in the House who hold Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene accountable, not really Republicans.
That's right. And we'll never know how Republicans might have voted if they had had the chance for a secret ballot on this one, whether there might have been more dissension and more willingness to punish Greene if you didn't have your name attached to it. But it's pretty clear by the end of the day on Thursday that Democrats are very, very determined to punish people who do and say the kinds of extraordinary things that Greene has done and said, and that Republicans do not have the same appetite for doing that.
Right. I'm really struck that at the end of this process, House Republicans have privately expressed their support for Liz Cheney in pretty large numbers, and they have publicly expressed their support for Marjorie Taylor Greene in pretty large numbers. And does that tell us everything that we need to know about the state of the Republican Civil War?
Well, it's worth noting here that one of the Republican members who votes in favor of keeping Greene on her committee assignments is Liz Cheney. That you don't have just an all-out war on that element within the Republican Party by exactly the same people who voted to impeach President Trump, that there still is a sort of sense that, you're wearing the same jersey as this member, and that Democrats shouldn't be allowed to just exercise the power of the majority to punish someone like that if we, the Republican Party, have not decided to do that ourselves.
So even the voice of accountability in this civil war ends up refusing to hold the voice of extremism within the Republican Party accountable.
It's really a decision on the part of the Republican leadership. And remember, on Thursday, Liz Cheney has been reaffirmed as a member of the Republican leadership, and that they're going to try to hold this rickety coalition together, and that they're going to try to include both the most traditional elements in the Republican Party and the most extreme elements in the Republican Party, at least for the duration of the current Congress. When you see 10 members voting to impeach President Trump, 11 members voting to strip Marjorie Taylor Greene of her committee assignments, it's very, very clear that the vast majority of Republicans are not eager to have that kind of all-out battle against an extreme element in their own party at this time.
Because they fear what will happen to them at the ballot box.
That's absolutely right. That so many times the conversation about the battle within the Republican Party becomes about, President Trump versus one other person, or, Matt Gaetz against Liz Cheney. And the force that we really should talk about here is Republican primary voters, that there is still a broad sense within Republican politics, including at the leadership level in both the House and Senate, that Republican primary voters really like President Trump, and they are really drawn to a version of politics that is totally alien to people who, entered Congress more than a couple of years ago, and that the voices of extremism, if they express themselves in a certain kind of way and on a certain kind of platform, whether it's Facebook or Fox News, they really get the Republican base riled up. And most members of Congress do not want to run headlong into that when they face the voters again in a year.
Alex, as we're talking, I'm realizing that while January 6th did cause a kind of temporary flare-up in this civil war we've been discussing and made it impossible for the party to avoid something like these two votes that just occurred in the House, Republicans are actually doing everything in their power to return to the dynamic of the past 4 years as quickly as possible, right? A dynamic in which they don't confront these divisions. They don't confront extremism head on, and a dynamic in which they put their heads down once again and hope that this silence, this unwillingness to reject far-right elements of the party, doesn't become a liability with voters or cause more violence. And that in their actions over the past week, they have made the decision not to confront it. Basically, they continue to put off this reckoning and hope that enough Americans are comfortable with a Republican Party that somehow holds space for both Liz Cheney and Marjorie Taylor Greene.
That's absolutely right.
Well, Alex, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the question is this still the party of Donald Trump, and does Marjorie Taylor Greene still hold a solid place in that party?
Chris, we're the party of Abraham Lincoln. We're the party of Ronald Reagan. We have to really take a hard look at who we are and what we stand for, what we believe in.
On Sunday, in her first television appearance since the effort to oust her from leadership, Liz Cheney made clear that she would not be backing down from her criticisms of former President Trump, and cautioned that the Republican Party risked being locked out of power if it did not show a majority of Americans that it could be trusted to lead truthfully.
We have to make sure that we are able to convey to the American voters we are the party of responsibility, we are the party of truth, that we actually can be trusted to handle the challenges this nation faces like COVID, but we should not be embracing the former president.
In response, Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted that, quote, "Trump is our leader, because he put America first and will never back down. Neither will I. Green predicted that what would lock Republicans out of power is abandoning Trump, and said of Cheney and her supporters, quote, "They just don't get it." We'll be right back.
This podcast is supported by